Hi, Anders, and welcome to Sharing Design podcast. And we've it's been a discovery for us to learn about your practice, and we published one of your projects already, and we hope to publish more. But today we would like to know more about your work, and I've been talking to a few people that I was going to be talking to you today, and there is a huge expectation because I think the main question is the first one I asked you when we first talked, which was how can you manage what is your drive to do the projects you do, you reusing materials in this complex world that we live where we need certificates for everything. So how can you explain us your design process and how your practice works?
Yeah, of course. Um, we work with this uh, mantra called form follows availability, and what that sets up is not just a certain approach to materials. It's also a certain approach to understanding the context we work within. I mean, I think architecture in general is is very focused on the context already. But I think when you start mixing in the material aspect, the social aspect, the environmental aspect, and the financial aspects in these new and different ways, I think that there's some different answers, and there's some different questions that come out of that process in its entirety. And I think we'll get into the nuts and bolts of how we actually do it a little bit later in the interview. But form follows availability, looking at what's already here in this abundant material world of ours, and working from that.
Hmm. Thank you. And could you tell us a bit about yourself and your role within Linear and yeah, basically what you do, but also your background and how you landed in this practice?
So my name is Anders Kiertzner, and I'm director in Linear, the circular advising department. We are a advisory and consultancy department within Linear, and we work mainly within the early phases of projects. So everything from scoping to strategy work to benchmarking. And I have a background in cultural studies, so anthropology and sociology, and have worked my entire career with strategic design and innovation management. So basically, what it is that I do, and we do in our team in circular advising, we we build scenarios, we build documentation and data to support and guide decision making before we get into the actual architectural process. And I ended up in Linear because I was uh, looking for a place that had the combination of both the strategic focus, so the push for sustainability on the broader spectrum. So both in terms of the materials side, so developing new materials, asking questions to existing materials, but also working on the political side of things. So pushing regulatory and policy through actual work, and that's the thing where I think that we are really making a difference is that we're not just talking about it. We are testing this future vision of what architecture could be through actual projects. So we build our visions, and we're very fortunate to have worked with some very ambitious clients over the past 12 years who have also let us make um, some of these projects that we are now sitting with and are starting to learn from now that the world's eye has also turned to sustainability at large. It's interesting for us to also experience the interest coming back to our projects, and the renewed understanding of where we need to go now, because it doesn't end. It's an ongoing process.
Indeed, and that's a very important part. It's an ongoing process and always learning and adapting very quickly, actually. But you said that this process started 12 years ago, and you mentioned vision as well. So I think that's very important to have. I think to work for a practice like yours that have a very clear vision and mission and an understanding of what they want to do, that has to be also enriching as a professional and at a personal level, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the company was started 12 years ago by Anders Lendager, who uh, who had an idea that he wanted to do architecture in a way that wasn't harmful to the environment. And the one thing is, of course, to build that vision, and one thing is to maybe also envision and flesh out the ideas for the actual buildings or the actual projects. Another thing is to get someone to collaborate with, and what we also realized back then was the challenge of actually finding someone who could help provide the materials and the processes and the know-how to actually make these um, make these new buildings in a new way also. So it was not just like a new idea with built with the traditional ways. It's also built in new ways with a new approach to materials. So it was in the beginning, uh, the vision was to create something new, but it ended up being created. It ended up being that everything had to be created from the bottom up, which was a kind of a pioneering feat in the early days.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting. That we'll get into some more technical questions that, sorry, apologies, that some people ask a lot, and I ask. I think again, one of the first questions I asked you the first time we talked. But you said also something about clients. So when you think about the way you design and work, architecture in general requires a lot of determination because you have that vision in mind that you mentioned earlier, and then but you need clients. So architecture, as opposed to other like painting or music, whatever, you need a client to develop your vision. That's usually difficult already. But then linear has added has made it even more difficult because you are adding constraints that the rest of practice, most of the practices don't have. Some of them are starting to apply it now, but you started 12 years ago, as you said. So how did you manage? And that's one of the main questions that I've heard a lot. How did you manage to overcome all these issues, like planning, for example? That's how you apply for planning if you don't know, because you said forms follows availability. If you don't know what the availability is when you're designing 2 years or 3 years before it's going to be built, how you deal with that from a planning point of view first, and then uh, from a certification and point of view. So how you get all the certificates at the end of the building to make sure that everything is fine and you get your PI and insurance and everything.
The the planning aspect of all of this has, of course, been uh, uh, tailor made for the projects we have been doing. But but before we even got to that stage, it's about also developing a vision together with someone who believes it. The interesting part about, you know, what we have done over the past 12 years is that we haven't forced it, you know, we haven't forced it onto anyone to do it in this way, but we have been very focused on building, like I said in the beginning, we've been very focused on building the arguments, um, understanding, you know, what is the long term vision of, let's say, a pension fund or a new innovative developer, trying to understand what is that they are trying to achieve on as a long game, and then merging the two visions of saying like, okay, you have this vision for the future, and then how are we actually going to do it then? And that's where Anders Lenne in the early days, he had the, you know, he had the guts to say, well, I believe I can do it. I believe that I should be the one who does this. So there is and still to this day, there's I don't want to call it convincing, but it's building solid scenarios and building solid argumentation and solid data for what we do, and being very transparent in the process. Um, Not being an architect myself, I always say that the two components that actually um, or the three components that actually realize the types of architecture that we do is dialogue, trust, and funding. And the dialogue part is not just uh, like you and I here having a conversation, or us trying to develop some kind of a vision together with the client. That's a part of the dialogue, but it's also a dialogue with the building itself. Um, it's a dialogue with the materials, trying to not necessarily force them to become something they don't want to be, but actually trying to stay open in the process. And that's where the planning aspect has to be very well thought out, and has to be designed in such a way that you have a process that supports a plan that needs to be more flexible at certain points of the project. And that is something we have had to learn ourselves over the years through the various projects. And the way we deal with it is actually um, going back to the question about our design process, and that is actually being very open and very transparent about the iterations that we do. So the decision makers are actually oftentimes brought into the design process, and they are step by step taken through some of the key decisions and some of the choices that needs to be made, because sometimes we don't have the material that we're actually going to use before much later in the actual project. And that means that the client has to sign off on something that they actually at that point might not know what will look like. But that's again where we bring up the different tools of building scenarios, saying like, we can't show you exactly what it's going to look like, but we will include you in all the entire process. We'll start out with, let's say, 10 different scenarios for what it might look like. And then over the coming months, we will hone it down, and we'll be more and more sure about, what it's going to look like. And by involving them, it becomes much more collaborative, become much more of a dialogue, and uh, it builds the trust that needs to open up for the funding, or the extra efforts or resources it takes for new investigations into new solutions or materials or what it might be. So I mean, it's not it's maybe not the traditional way of answering a question like that, but there has been, and there is still a lot of uh, a basis of trust in this, but we don't take the trust for granted. We build the scenarios, we build the arguments, and now we are in a fortunate position versus 12 years ago, where we actually are starting to have data on the buildings and the processes, and the inputs and outputs of all that. So we have experience, and we have some knowledge now that we didn't have 12 years ago.
I think it's remarkable, and I've said that several times, because having that ambition, as you said, 12 years now, I'm sure you will have clients that go to your practice and they want a project to be done that way. But 12 years ago, to do it and to earn that trust from a developer, an investor, someone that's going to put their money into something that they don't know what they are going to get. In the current world that we all live, that you want certainty about everything, I think it's well done. It's unbelievable. I think it's a really good example and inspiring. The other thing, it's clients. So I would like to know. I can't think of a client because as an architect myself, a client going to a practice and saying, "Okay, give me a design. We'll go for planning. I don't know if all the process. There is a lot of extra work. There could be more stress as well, because all the uncertainty that you wouldn't have if you just go and choose the materials that are in the catalog like everybody else. So what kind of clients are keen, or is there a certain type of clients that you work with that they have different aspirations, or you just get any client on your journey and persuade them to go to work in that way?
I mean, we speak to anyone and everyone who is, ambitious within this agenda. We are very fortunate to have become a brand that is recognized for a certain type of architecture, or a certain approach, a certain way of doing it. So that's predominantly also the types of phone calls that we receive. But it like it did 12 years ago, still today, it starts out with a healthy maybe not skepticism, but like a questioning, like what is going on in the world right now, and what is it that needs to change. And we get a lot of clients and potential clients contacting us to just basically get an understanding of what is this about. The same questions as you ask: what is the timing like? How do you budget with something like this? How will we be involved? How will we be able to show something to our investors to get them on board? Will we be able to, if they're not full owners, will we be able to sell this building again on the commercial market? And I mean that where 12 years ago that was maybe more, on a trust and vision basis. Now we have answers for all of these questions. So I think that, we speak to everyone, and I think that especially within the last 2 to 3 years, we have seen a tremendous uptake in developers, in investors who actually fundamentally want to know them. They might not be ready to do it yet, but they genuinely want to know, and they want to come here. They want to see the projects. They want to see that they're still standing. They want to see, the mailbox outside of the house have been emptied every day, and they want to see, the life actually being lived. Because one thing is, of course, like we spend a lot of time on, and most of everyone else within this industry does. Like, we spend a lot of time on the technical part of this. But again, we're in the fortunate position of being able to show actual projects that have been built, that have been finalized, that have been turned over to people living and working and dwelling in these buildings, which is actually, where the buildings should be, as a part of our communities and as a part of our cities, contributing to our infrastructure and to our communities and to our social life. And that's where things change a little bit. So we get a lot of interest from people who just want to know. They just want to see it for real. Is this just a magic show by some fancy consultants, or is this actually something that is viable and feasible and desirable at the end of the day? And so, I mean, it's not just, we're not just preaching. We don't feel we're preaching to the choir anymore. It's very much a very diverse set of clients and potential clients that we're getting.
I think that's good that you said the last 2-3 years, and I think I've seen as well a lot of changes that are happening last 2-3 years, depending on the country as well and the region of the world. But the last year, 2-3, it's been exponential, isn't it? And that it's really good to see that happening, and practices like yours changing. But one thing you said earlier that I think is key, or you said many things that are key, but I think trust, transparency, and collaboration. I think those three are key. I think are key in any relationship, actually, in any project. But for it to work in the way you work, all that has to be there. So from a collaboration point of view, it's not just the client on board. You need the contractor and the rest of the design team on board with you. They need to believe. They all have to believe in this process. Otherwise, then it won't work. So, how can you tell us a bit more about how that works and when these different team members join the project?
Usually, everyone is onboarded way earlier in the process than they normally would, because we are also depending on their expertise and their knowledge about a certain area or a certain part of the process as well. So the design process and the iterations and the planning and also the budgeting needs to happen in a little bit of a different way, the way we realize architecture. And it's also, um, back to the trust thing. All of our buildings that have been realized within, the existing standard building regulations. There's no fancy stuff going on. There's no, you know, there's nothing like that in it. Like we have worked with and within the constraints of the previous building regulations and the building codes. All the materials have been have been deemed fit for building, but some of them have needed to be treated in a different way, and that's where we really need very specialized input from key collaborators very early on, not just to get pricing, but also to qualify the technical aspect of the project very early on, because like most architecture processes, a part of what we do also starts with a vision, but we have to very quickly get to a place where we can prove and risk manage the actual process and the technical feasibility of the project. So back to the whole aspect of collaboration, getting people in a room together. We are lucky enough that that we some of the projects we have created here in Denmark, some of the collaborators from back then have now specialized even further and are building out their business to support more of this material circulation and so on and so forth. And we can now, now it's not about educating each other or figuring out what to do. Now they have a service that we can, you know that we can call up and ask for, which is also reducing the complexity and the overall project risk tremendously.
And I think the other one is risk. When you think about someone investing their money, they would look at risk and cost and time. We talk about time as well, but I think they are embedded in the cost of risk. So risk, we said, is sorted. From a cost point of view, would it be, because if we assume those materials are there already, so we don't need to manufacture, so you would think they would be cheaper to buy, but at the same time there is a more complex process. So when you compare the way your projects are built, would they be cost neutral compared to a baseline? Would it be a bit cheaper or a bit more expensive, or it depends on the project?
I mean, I think over the years we have tried to answer that question in a consistent way, but I think I want to answer it maybe a little bit more vaguely and say it's at where we are right now as an industry. I think it's fair to assume that this very highly customized process would be completely cost neutral versus a streamlined industry of readily available materials that are made from questionable resources extracted from nature. So all of these customized processes do cost more, but it's also about where we place them in the budgets and so on and so forth. So we have experience with that in many different types of projects where we split projects up into a more traditional, construction or architectural budgets, and then we have an innovation budget to the side where we follow a couple of material streams to figure out, how can one inform the other, and build this availability, design paradigm within the project. So there's a number of different answers to your question, but right now it is still a very highly customized process. You had some of our first projects. We had to create a concrete company for ourselves, because nobody wanted to support us with making the concrete that we wanted to do, and reusing wood and so on and so forth. So there's been a lot of things going on, but we're also up against, like I said, it's a matter of scale. So we're also up against the material developers and the material manufacturers. It's a huge market, is a huge business, and this, at this point, just they can't compete in terms of price. It can do so many other things, but I'm interested to see in the next let's just say the next 5 to 10 years, when the established the big players from the material sector, they start to take a serious interest in this, because then I will be able to give you a completely different answer than I just did.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely, I think that's right. And also, just happened that this morning, earlier today, I was attending a presentation, and it was a practice from Norway, if I remember correctly, and they were doing something similar to what we are talking about now. And they started, I believe, 3 years ago. And they said there were no marketplaces where to find these materials. Now the situation is completely different. So only 3 years after, now you have all those marketplaces. So it's easier, which means hopefully what you said about in 5, 10 years time, at the speed things are changing, there will be more availability, and then the cost wouldn't be a barrier. The other one, talking about cost or related to cost, is there are people, and that's something that's growing, that are keen to pay a premium for that more sustainable house, office, whatever building we want to build. And again, this morning, talking to a good friend, she was saying she would be happy to pay more to live in a house that has been built with these principles, because it's aligned with her ethos. Same as you pay a premium for a certain type of milk or meat or whatever. So, and that kind of demand is growing. So what we were discussing is, as the demand grows, then is the scale that you were talking about earlier, and hopefully that will make things change quicker. So would you see that as an option, that the, let's say, the demand and the market will speed up that change, or is that too optimistic or naive?
No, I think it's a really good question, and I think you basically answered it yourself. It's the old supply and demand dynamics. It really is. We're fortunate enough uh, to now be in a position where we are sometimes offered materials. We we're working on a couple of projects where there's also been like a uh, you know like you have a request for proposal, then we have a request for materials, where because we have the DNA and the profile that we do, uh, we've been able to reach out to a larger community, and ask them for support in finding some of these materials that we're looking for. And I just want to say that, and this is from our experience, there's so many materials out there. There's so much stuff in this world. So it's also having you know it's not just necessarily always about the buildings. It's also what do we understand as resources and what do we understand as materials, because it's about having, like I said, a dialogue with the materials and the resources as well, saying what can you become, and what can we use this for. Is if the glass pane in a window doesn't work as an outside window anymore because of the performance of the glass doesn't live up to the standards anymore, does that mean it's just waste, or can we use it for something else, like indoor applications and so on and so forth? So I think get into a lot of detail with what materials are and what they should do and so on and so forth. But I think and I'm happy to hear with that Norwegian company is making a move in that regard as well, because we're still not done with asking these, the questions, fundamental questions of how we use these materials and how we apply them, and what they can become. And I think there's still a lot of innovation potential within that space.
And I think it requires an attitude to always be open and flexible, to adapt and adjust, because it can't be that I can't see this working the way you get. You have you specify your products, you have your design that you normally do, and you follow a kind like a linear process. This one, I see this process more like going back and forth and up and down and changing all the time, which it makes it more interesting as well.
And I think that's a part of the I think that's a part of the desire of the product as well. I mean, we don't try to make things look like they are, upcycled or reused. We try to make we try to make a premium product that is aesthetically pleasing, that functions on a high level, that has, that retains its value in the largest, sense of the word, uh, and is not, feeding into this, you know this conception of, oh yeah, we're using waste, we're just putting waste inside of buildings. We have a very keen aesthetic, you know sensibility towards this, because we want to elevate it. We want to make it relevant on the same terms as everything else. And that's why I also said that the dialogue and ongoing dialogue and innovation potential within what are materials and what are resources and how do we actually apply them. I think it's still there's still a lot to be done, because it should be a premium product. I mean, there shouldn't be a difference. I mean,
No, and they are beautiful as well. If you look at your projects, they are beautiful projects, and something else as well, because of the way and the process, they are all unique. It's not a project that you can replicate again and again and again, because again, it's as you said, the form follows availability. You don't know what's going to be available, so it makes it more difficult, isn't it? So on the talking about that's a way of working that is very much related to what's around you and what's available around you. So how does that work when you get a client from another country or another region that is not your local, is not the kind of your supply chain, to call it that way, where you get your materials. So how can you extrapolate that to other countries? Do you need to then establish new relationships there, or is there something already established?
no, it's sometimes there are, some things that are already established. Sometimes we also work based on a um, um, based on existing, structures, buildings that are already there, where we need to understand the buildings, and then can do a reach out to potential partners based on that. And sometimes it's a completely customized process as well. Sometimes it's literally starting from scratch, and then having to, take in and collaborate with partners and trying to figure out how would you do it here, and what's legal and what's, possible here, and so on and so forth. So it's the the outreach is incredibly important, and that's also one of the things that happens very early on in the projects we're now running in Sweden and in Germany, is that we've actually put that into the project description very early on. And the first page of our um, of our competition was a risk overview, a risk management overview. And one of the things was, we need to start out having conversations very early on in the project, because we need to onboard people, we need to have conversations, we need to figure out who the specialists are, what they think about a project like this and how we can work and so on. And then we can take, the experience we have from the project we realized and the experiences we have with the types of collaboration and the data we have from actually doing something in practice, and show them and say, like, this is how we did it in Denmark. Would that be, would that be a place to start for, our collaboration? Is it possible to do the same thing here, or do we need a new process? So it's also one of those things that are front loaded in the project, especially when we go when we cross borders, most definitely.
Maybe a difficult question, but I hope it's not. After all that process and everything we talk about, do you have repeating clients? So clients that after going through that process go back to you and say, now I want to do it again.
Yes, we do. As these types of projects take a very long time, and I think one of the things um, that are becoming very clear to us is that when you go through a process like this, from the client side, you don't just end up with, the asset, the building or the thing. You also end up with a full overview of a process that has been customized to your targets, to the plot of land that you have available to you in this time that we're in right now, in the political, climate that we're in the financial climate that we're in. So from my experience, the repeat customers coming back to us, they have, from the first time to the second time, they've been back home, and then they have learned and absorbed a lot of this information that have come out of the process, because this is the thing that they need to do in order to also, mature their organization, in order to take the decisions, in the next projects. Because they we like we did in the beginning, like, we can't take responsibility for everything that goes on. We also need, informed partners. So 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 when we are right now in a couple of conversations with returning clients, and they're coming back with uh, so many great insights, and so many great, um, clear guidelines for what they want to do next, because they have been through a process already. So I don't want to use the term prototyping or piloting, but the first time has proven to be the thing that actually invests into the second processes. But you need to absorb it as a client, or as an investor as well, because that's where the retention of value really is, as an investment, and as return on investment for maybe the higher expense you pay for the first one. Then, it's basically just you paying for your education for the second one.
That makes sense. It's good to hear that's happening. And it would be, we could be talking here for hours and hours. But what I was thinking is, it would be good to talk to you again, maybe in a couple of years, and see where we are. But before we end this conversation, I would like also something that in the last few months, for several reasons, I've been learning or working more closely to some things going on in Denmark, and I can see that there is something happening there that I don't have enough knowledge about, but I can see there is a growing interest in a wider on the on a sustainable approach to design in the wider sense. So you have your focus on the circular economy, but it's also the craftsmanship, natural materials, and there is this kind of, and it's also good to see that many of the cases are young practices that want to that think differently. So could you tell us a bit more about that, and what is the foundations of that change?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and we experience the same thing, which to us is, it's the greatest outcome at all, because it's, our approach is not fixing everything by itself, and we are learning new things every day, and so on. But sustainability in the broader sense of the term is is a multifaceted thing that needs to be approached and attacked from from many different areas, whether it's biomaterials, or it's recycling, or it's regenerative, or it's there's so many aspects to this that we welcome all these approaches, because it makes the collective approach stronger, that we have many different lenses um, to look at a project through. And um, and I think that, because of also the size of this country, it feels like everything is cooking at the moment, because we're so close to each other. Right behind our office is a super interesting project that has just been realized, and the building we're sitting in is going to be a part of a huge development plan here in the center of Copenhagen as well over the coming years. So all these approaches is what we need in order to realize the potential. We don't have the answer for everything, so we welcome and want to include as many perspectives as possible.
That's really interesting. So thank you very much, and it's really exciting to. I really admire your work, and I hope to see more of your projects, and also influence. It's already influencing the work of other practices, not only in Denmark but abroad, and I'm sure it's something we'll see more and more. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up in a couple of years and see how everything is going.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the entire team at Share Your Green Design for setting this up. It's been a
Thank you very
pleasure.
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.